Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox. I'm the Compliance Evangelist, and I'd like to welcome you to This Week in FCPA. First, a word from our sponsor, Affiliated Monitors. Founded in 2004, Affiliated Monitors provides professional, independent integrity monitoring and ethics and compliance assessments nationally and internationally and across almost all industries. With its knowledge of effective ethics and compliance programs and cultures, Affiliated Monitor is respected for its work as the corporate monitor on matters ranging from multinational corporations to small and mid-sized companies and even individuals. Having served in over 750 monitorships, no one has more experience as an independent monitor than the team at Affiliated Monitors. For more information on how an independent monitor can help improve your company's ethics and compliance program, visit our sponsor, Affiliated Monitors, at www.affiliatedmonitors.com.
This week, Mike Volkov does a four-part series on the new OFAC guidance. Wei Chun and Pam Davis weigh in on the 2019 Department of Justice new FCPA guidelines. A noose tightens around Credit Suisse and Prime Vest in Mozambique. What are the compliance lessons from a messy and public food fight? Matt Kelly tells us. How does scapegoating come into play? Laurent Cohen-Tanuki talks about this on NYU's Compliance Ethics blog. I continue my exploration of using a monitor. Barry V2 gives us 5 common facts to look at on a fire alarm. Equifax is about to settle its data breach. Why should compliance training start with a smile? Ronnie Feldman lets us know, and Tom Fox takes a look at with a new white paper about lessons for hospitality around major sporting events. All this week on This Week in FCPA.
Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox. Welcome to this episode 155 of This Week in FCPA for the week ending May 24th, 2019, the Memorial Day edition. Jay, we've got a full set of stories this week and a holiday weekend we're both looking forward to, so why don't we just hit it?
Let's jump right in, Tom.
So Mike Volkov put together just, I think, a fabulous series, Jay, on the new OFAC compliance structure. It's a 4-part series. We've linked to the 4 parts. He talks about it in a podcast. The framework structure is management commitment, risk assessment, internal controls, testing and audit, and training. Obviously, it draws from the Department of Justice's thoughts on a best practices compliance program, but it adds some OFAC-specific components and requirements. So I would urge everyone to take a look at it. It really doesn't matter what compliance you're in, anti-bribery, anti-corruption, AML, money laundering, trade compliance, export control, import. It's a great way to think about your compliance program. So, Jay, I would really urge everyone to take a look at it. And once again, if you're interested in the audio format, Mike, as always, does a great podcast on it.
So next up, this story comes to us from Compliance Week. Wei Chen was just in D.C., where Tom was for this past week's Compliance Week, and along with her new colleague, Pam Davis, who just left ORC in San Francisco, they weigh in on the 2019 Department of Justice new FCPA guidance. And Tom, I'd be interested to get your takes, but there are many blogs and articles out there looking at the guidance as a roadmap for best practices for companies to follow. And Wei Chen has taken a contrarian position, saying that it really has a very limited value as a best practice guide, and its purpose is to help prosecutors determine the appropriate form of any resolution or prosecution, monetary penalties, and compliance obligations. So, Tom, you heard Wei Chen speak in D.C. What were your takeaways?
Well, Jay, she really did not talk about the new guidance in her speech. Actually, she didn't talk about it at all. She did, however, do I believe last week, which you had the opportunity to listen to, a podcast with Carrie Penman from Navex Global on this, where she expressed those thoughts. She has fleshed them out a little bit more, she and Pam Davis, in an article in Bloomberg. And she really takes the I think, prosecutorial position that these are minimum best practices of a company that is in a FCPA investigation, and this is the minimum you can do to obtain the full benefits under the FCPA corporate enforcement program. I guess from my perspective, Jay, I see them as more beneficial than that. And certainly you can always exceed the government expectations, and you at the end of the day more profitable. So kind of an interesting take. Certainly when Wei Chin speaks, you need to listen, and it is something that everyone should read and take a consideration of.
So next up, Tom, the news tightens around Credit Suisse and Primavest and Mozambique. What's the story there?
So this is, Jay, just a burgeoning corruption story. Lots of different compliance angles, regime change, certainly bribery and corruption, how the invidiousness of bribery and corruption, and how even countries that are resource rich can be extraordinarily damaged by this, by bribery and corruption. This started out as the tuna boat case, where Mozambique floated certain bonds to purchase tuna boats for their Charlie the Tuna fleet. I'm sure the girls probably eat a lot of tuna fish, and hopefully Charlie's not in there, but there's a worldwide market for tuna fish, and Mozambique wanted to capture some of that. The problem was the money didn't go to the tuna boat fleet. It went to the pockets of corrupt government officials, and they were facilitated by the Swiss banking giant Credit Suisse. Now we have a Credit Suisse banker who was indicted plead guilty. And that plea of guilt probably will, a woman named Detlina Sabeva, and if she cooperates and names names, it could portend greater difficulties, legal difficulties for not only Credit Suisse, but Prevenist, which is another company involved in this, and certainly the players in the former Mozambique government who dipped themselves into this fund to take literally hundreds of millions of dollars out. It's a $2.2 billion loan for projects, and could be a very difficult situation for all involved going forward.
So next up, we have a story coming to us from the place that I hail from the state of New Hampshire, from Canaan, New Hampshire, and we get this reporting through Matt Kelly in Radical Compliance from the Manchester Union Leader, the most conservative paper in the United States. It seems that Bonnie Kimball, a cafeteria worker at Mascoma Regional High School in Canaan, New Hampshire, lost her job when she allowed a student to take several food items from the school's a la carte menu, even though he didn't have enough money in his account to pay for him or to pay for them. The fundamental issue here is one of policy management, where conflicting objectives with a helping of a third-party governance on the side. So what should Mascoma Regional District have done, or more broadly, what should organizations do to avoid such a fiasco? First, you can let employees seek exceptions to public policy quickly and easily. Second, you can train your employees thoroughly on the organization's priorities and trusts. And third, you can make sure your third parties align their operations. So how did this all end? Don't die of shock, but once Kimball's plight became news, the Mascoma Regional School District declared that if Cafe Services didn't rehire Kimball after she was fired and give her back pay, the district would proceed with a new $500,000 contract. Now, it turns out there is a little bit more to the story which Matt dug out, and according to articles from the Union Leader, Kimball had been providing free food to the student for months and lying about it. She also sent the student several Facebook messages. So first, as much as we hate to blame the victim, Cafe Services did itself no favors with its 4-sentence termination letter. The letter, as we can all see in the photo in the article, said that Kimball had committed only one infraction of not charging a student. So it's ultimately comes down to poor documentation of a troublesome employee's behavior, but it set off this Twitter storm, and Matt touches on it in the links that we include to the article.
So next up, Jay, a very interesting article in New York University's Compliance and Enforcement blog on scapegoating. And At first I thought the author was going to talk about how the U.S. government was targeting foreign companies for selective FCPA enforcement, but that was not the focus of her article at all. She was more concerned with companies that would target mid-level executives to protect higher executives. And furthermore, she said that it's almost a not a contra argument, but a contradiction. Nevertheless, I thought it was an interesting hypothetical that if a person in Europe turns whistleblower, that may be a tacit admission of guilt. And in Europe, where there are considerably less protections for whistleblowers, the person who actually blows the whistle may become the subject of an investigation and turned over by their company to the authorities. I have to say, I find that I'm not quite sure what the right word is, except perhaps incorrect. Nevertheless, it's an interesting point raised and something that I think needs to be followed. I haven't seen that yet, but like I said, an interesting point for consideration.
Yeah, it also echoes to me a little bit the story we had last week about a judge admonishing the SEC for waiting so long to bring charges against VW. And part of that wrist slap was the fact that quite often it appears that the DOJ is outsourcing investigations to companies. So I can see where Loren gets the idea, but you're right, it's definitely counter to what's currently out there right now. This week, I continue with my series on corporate compliance insights, exploring the use of monitors. And basically, I talk about the selection of appropriate monitors and how it can really make or break the entire program and the relationship. And basically, if you link to the article, I take a look at what are you looking for the skill set that a monitor should have. They should have expertise, not necessarily in specifically one vertical of law, but they should have an expertise in how you structure and run a monitorship. They need to very carefully balance the interests of both the company that is having the monitor and the government regulator. You need to look for a monitor that's going to bring value to the company. And at the end of the day, any company that's faced with the need to select a monitor should run a thoughtful and diligent process. And by using this type of deliberation, the company will make sure to not only understand its goals in the monitor process, but to find value with hiring an appropriate monitor. So again, this is part 4 in an ongoing series on corporate compliance insights. Tom, we haven't heard from our friends on the other side of the pond in a while. What does Barry V2 and the Bribery Act guys have to say?
So always good to see them post. Certainly the unique British perspective on things is always interesting. And Barry and Richard put up a post entitled Dawn Raid Searches Media Inquiries and our top 5 tips to what they have in common with fires. So his 5 tips are for dawn raids and searches: keep calm and be courteous to the attending officials. Ask to see a copy of the search warrant. If there's no warrant, ask them to explain the legal basis for the search. 3, identify and keep items separate that are protected by privilege. 4, contact external lawyers, and when you have that representation secured, inform the officials. And 5, of course, do not obstruct the search. Media inquiries: 1, listen to what they say and note it. 2, do not comment. Ask if you can get back to them. 3, contact a PR specialist within your firm or outside advisor. 4, agree a reactive statement with your advisors and contact the outlet who first contacted you. And 5, consider the appropriate next steps. Always good to know, or rather good to review. And I don't think that people really train enough, Jay, on point 1, which is dawn raids. I think people are more attuned here in the United States to media inquiries, but you need to be ready if you do have a dawn raid.
And I love that the number 1 point in such a very British way is keep calm. That's always good advice to follow. Next up, we're taking a look at an article by John Rush on dipping through geometries. And on May 10th of this year, Equifax, announced its financial results for the quarter ending March 31st. In that announcement, the company reported that during the quarter, it took a $690 million pre-tax legal accrual relating to the 2017 data breach that resulted in the exposure of the personal data of 148 million U.S. individuals, or 56% of all Americans. Equifax explained that the $690 million reflects its estimated losses that they expect to incur with a potential global resolution of the consumer class. The $690 million, according to Bank Information Security, represents only a substantial portion of the $1.35 billion with a B in costs that Equifax reported. And what John looks at is that chief information security officers and chief compliance officers should really draw on this information and reminding senior executives in the companies and agencies about substantial compliance, reputational, and other risks. The continuing spate of reports about breaches that have resulted in losses of billions of personal records and cyber thefts that have cost billions of dollars in loss, however, indicates that too many firms and agencies have not taken that lesson to heart.
And Ronnie focuses on compliance training, but from a humorous perspective. He's a Second City veteran, and he has a company called Learnings and Entertainment, where he puts together compliance training and really helps people see the humor in it and hopefully make the training more memorable. He's got an article in Corporate Compliance Insights on the compliance practitioner's greatest challenge of their role versus their reputation. And as always, his article is very humorous, but it has a larger point. So we link to it in the show notes. It's something that if you don't know Ronnie, you should definitely check out his website. I suppose I can give this spoiler alert. He's going to be premiering a new podcast on the Compliance Podcast Network in the next 1 or 2 months. So I'm looking forward to having Ronnie sharing his wisdom on the podcast format with me. And always good stuff from Ronnie. Your thoughts?
My thoughts is I love the guy. I'm going to be on a panel with him later on this year in September. And one of the challenges that we all have is trying to keep training fresh, new, and resident. And Ronnie definitely has an inside track on figuring that out. Last up, our third story from Corporate Compliance Insights is really a new white paper that Tom has put together. And Tom, what does it deal with, and why might people want to have a look?
So Jay, we recently had a FCPA enforcement action with Telefona, Brazil, around their hospitality program for the 2014 World Cup matches in Brazil. And they got in trouble because for two reasons. One, either they didn't have a policy, or one, they didn't have a policy, and then two, what little they had, they really didn't follow. But it caused me to think about a question I get from time to time, which is taking customers to very high-level sporting events here in the United States. Of course, that could be the Super Bowl, it could be the Masters, it could be the U.S. Golf Open, it could be the World Series, it could be NBA championships, which will be coming up soon. And you just need to think through how you can do it. I paired the Telefonica FCPA enforcement action with a prior enforcement action of BHP Billiton, where Billiton got in trouble around their 2008 Beijing Olympics hospitality program. Their Billiton did have a robust compliance program and a robust risk management program. The problem was that they either didn't follow it, they cut and pasted into it, and they didn't put appropriate oversight that they had specified within their compliance program to use in it. So I put those two together to really try to lay out a roadmap for the compliance practitioner to think about how can you do this. I think you can take customers to the Super Bowl, even if they're government officials. If recognizing it is high risk, but if you put a high risk management protocol around it and follow the steps and then have an appropriate level of management oversight, I believe it can be accomplished. So I was really interested in this area, this issue, and thought it was an appropriate topic for a white paper. And Sarah had unfortunately agreed and published it on Corporate Compliance Insights. I hope people will check it out. If they have any questions on how to do hospitality at major sporting events, please feel free to give me a shout.
So next up, Tom, you had one of your 5-part podcast series. It was sponsored by Ascent Compliance, and the issue at hand was maintaining market access. Can you give us a little bit more insight into the 5 parts?
Sure, Jay. Ascent Compliance focuses on supply chain compliance, so a little bit different than the anti-bribery, anti-corruption compliance that you and I typically focus on. But that difference, I think, makes it much more interesting for the compliance practitioner. And this podcast series was on maintaining market access, which is, I don't think, a topic that our people, if I can use that phrase, really think about a lot. But people in the supply chain think about it quite a bit. So we took a look at, we introduced it, we looked at the current challenges around trade compliance. Jared Connors, my former colleague at another company, talked about continuous monitoring in the supply chain. We took a dive into perhaps one of the areas that your folks at AMI might have some insight into, which is the federal acquisition regulations and flow downs. And really there we talked about how the government is pushing down compliance through the supply chain of its primary suppliers. And we ended up with chemical and product compliance. So it's a really interesting way to think through how a compliance program directly not impacts a business, but allows you to keep doing business. So I thought it was an important series. It was certainly interesting for me and for any ABC or anti-bribery, anti-corruption compliance practitioner. I think you'll get a lot of good ideas out of it from the folks at Ascent Compliance.
Good stuff, Tom. Next up, on your travels, you're going to be coming to Beantown in June. And what brings you out to Boston?
So the compliance evangelist will be in Boston. So Boston, can't wait. The week of June 10 through June 14, I've got actually 3 events. 2 are listed on this week's show notes. Courtesy of you and Affiliated Monitors, you're hosting me for a compliance masterclass 2-day session on June 11 and 12. And then AMI, you, once again, and your colleagues are putting on a roundtable on Thursday. Hopefully that's Thursday the 13th.
Yep.
Yes, Thursday the 13th. And we're going to take a look at the new FCPA guidance in a roundtable format. I'm also going to do an event at Compliance Week, which will be on Monday the 10th. I'll have information on that later. But information and registration is in the show notes. I hope if you're in Boston or anywhere in New England that you can attend one of these events going forward, Jay.
Sounds perfect. And I think before we got on the air, you said something about Astros and Red Sox this weekend. What's that all about? Yes.
So after the near sweep of Boston by Houston in Boston last weekend, the Red Sox are coming down to play a series of 3 games at Minute Maid Park. My wife and I are going to one, so we're going to get to see the Sox and the Astros, the best team in baseball, with a team that I think is around 500. So it's going to be an interesting weekend, and hopefully yet another sweep or almost sweep.
Yeah, so we'll see what happens next week. I'm still happy that we're hovering around 500, and as you know, Tom, it's a long season, but your Astros, I believe you shared with me, do have the best record in baseball, so we need to give them props for that. As we are at the end of May, it is Memorial Day, and our thoughts turn to all the people who help us in this country and fight for our liberty and our freedom. So we'd like you to turn your thoughts there this way, besides watching baseball and barbecuing. But those are my thoughts for the weekend. Anything on yours, Tom?
No, Jay, I just would echo that Memorial Day celebrates those who made the ultimate sacrifice on behalf of our country. And just, take a minute on Monday to either think about that or silently thank the people who have done so. There's a lot of people and a lot of generations before Jay and I who did that. There are people in Jay and I's generation. There's people in generations after Jay and I who have sacrificed, made the ultimate sacrifice for this country, and the freedoms we enjoy right up till this day and hopefully a long time into the future are in large part because of the sacrifices that people in our military made, people in our first responders make, and anyone who gave their lives in the service of our country, the state you live in, or your local municipality. I'd just like to ask you to think about them on Monday.
That's a perfect way to go out, Tom. On behalf of Tom Fox, the compliance evangelist, and myself, Jay Rosen, Mr. Monitor, we'd like to thank you for joining us for This Week in FCPA, episode 155 for the week ending May 24th, 2019, the Memorial Day edition. Have a great weekend and be safe.
Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox again. I'd like to thank you again for listening to this episode of This Week in FCPA. As you can tell, the Astros are playing the Red Sox, and all I can say is go Astros. If you have any questions, you can email Jay at jrosen at affiliatedmonitors.com. You can email me at tfox@tfoxlaw.com. I hope you'll join Jay and I again next week, where we wrap up some of the stories that catch our collective eyes next week. This Week in FCPA, sponsored by Affiliated Monitors, is a production of the Compliance Podcast Network.